Well, thanks for joining us today. My name's Leah Flint, and I'm a writer for Snack Magazine. Um, so basically, let's just jump into it. So to start off with, for anyone who might be new to your music, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing it for quite a while now. I produced under the name Auntie Flo. That was a name that just kind of started to use back when I was a student. So this is like 20 odd years ago or something. And I think like the music that I make as Auntie Flo is kind of remained relatively consistent, albeit with the kind of widest possible brief or identity or framework or whatever to work around, which I quite enjoy. So it's it's generally kind of this exploratory kind of mission to create new sounds that fuse different cultures and different collaborations that are all kind of formed under an identity and a lens that I guess my background is in club music, so it comes from that starting point. And Glasgow is a kind of key part of that. The experience of me I had as a teenager and in my early 20s in Scotland and in Glasgow in particular, and kind of that kind of gateway into underground music through the clubs and the different club nights that were on at that time. It still provides like a massive steer for me, just the attitude as well, and just the kind of rawness of everything and stuff. So yeah, I guess that's what I have been inspired by. But then laterally, I guess having had the opportunity to explore outside of my home city, through basically just had the opportunity that you get as a DJ, that then meant that I kind of started to go, right, let's try and learn from everywhere that I'm visiting. And that could be either from like doing field recordings, or that could be meeting just random people, through serendipity or whatever means you end up having these encounters. And then that as an experience, wanting to bring that storytelling aspect into my music as well.
Yeah.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. Like, I feel like your music is very distinct, and even the name Auntie Flo is quite distinct as well. And I wanted to ask about that because what made you pick like Auntie? You know what I mean? Like, what was the vibe there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've got an Auntie Flo. That's essentially where it comes from. Auntie Flores is going. Auntie, which is my mum's side, is going. My dad's side is Scottish, and so I guess perhaps it was a nod to my Goan roots, which kind of makes sense when you listen to music, especially this new album, but that's taken me like 20 years to do or whatever. And then I guess the direct was this: my mom always used to compare me to her for some reason, like when I was growing up. So there was a kind of, oh, like, you're just like Auntie Flo or whatever. And then and I guess flow, the word, is a kind of key component of what I find interesting in the medium of music, which is this kind of altered state of consciousness, this flow state. And when I was a student in Edinburgh University, I was doing psychology. That's my degree, and I was reading, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow, and I was like, wow, this is like such a good explanation to what happens or what I'm experiencing when I'm, having the best DJ kind of nights, either as a dancer but more so as a DJ. And you get into that kind of mode where time elapses and you kind of have this heightened kind of state, but you're not really in conscious kind of control of all your actions. These things just flow through you and stuff. And I find that sort of state very interesting to explore. And that's kind of been a way of me, well, just, and it's constant source of inspiration really. And I guess I now run a record label called A State of Flow, as a nod to that. So that's the kind of thing, obviously, that lots of people think, as I found out laterally, and before, after it was too late really, that it's a kind of euphemism for time of the month.
Yeah, with the app and everything. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that came later. But certainly in certain cultures, like America, for example, that seems like it's very commonplace. That Auntie Flo, and people are like, why do you call yourself like that? And I'm like, well, I generally didn't know, so I'm a bit embarrassed by that. And then some people think it's a great thing. Like, I mean, I've got females that think, you know, it's a sort of a feminist statement or something, which, you know, I just
You
wasn't.
can incorporate that.
I can write off the back of that, but it wasn't.
It makes it work.
It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't deliberate. But then other people think, oh, this is a silly name or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, I think like it's one of those things as an artist. You pick a name and then you're stuck with it, and it becomes its own thing, hopefully. But obviously, for new people discovering my music, they're like, "What is it? What is going on?" And it was, you know, some of them care more than others. So it is what it is.
It is what it is. I feel like it does make sense because I have to admit I'm new to your music, and I was listening to your new album, Birds of Paradise. And I feel like I can definitely see the sense of flow and everything that goes into the album, even with the first song, Paradise 23. I was listening to it this morning with my coffee, and I was like dancing. I felt like I was getting into that flow. So I feel like it does make sense.
Right.
But you spoke about your new album as like something returning to your dance roots. So I wanted to ask, like, where are you returning from? Like, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, well, it's nice to hear you listening to music and enjoying it. That's exactly what I was doing when I was making it. I mean, this is the key of the thing, and I guess where this album has kind of come from, and the return, I guess, was the fact that I made it entirely myself as a sort of solo expedition in the studio, and I'd kind of spent a long time, last 5 years since COVID time, really kind of going, right, I've got to just done this for so long, I've just got to commit and build like a studio that's in my own image of what I would, you know, all the learnings that I've done in terms of music production and kind of been in various different studios and all over the world. And it's like, let's make something that's my own. And I've kind of been working on that, getting advice from various people and things like that, and putting that into the studio. And the idea with the studio was to create an environment where I can sort of flow with the music and it be as responsive to my ideas. It's that translation of like the idea into the actual music and stuff. So trying to get everything kind of like synced up, from the synths to the drum machines to a lot of the kind of instruments that I picked up over the years and stuff. You know, I do a lot of kind of buying of random just sound producing objects that I find interesting, and that creates character and it brings a storytelling aspect and things like that. So the idea with the album was to do that, and the best way of, I think, representing that was through kind of dance music club kind of like lens, although you know you can define it in different ways. And the return part of it was the fact that what I've tended to do in the last few albums, certainly the one I did before, like the one that came out last year, which was called In My Dreams, I'm a Bird and I'm Free. So the starting point is always the same, because it's always kind of my ideas put on as rough sketches onto different kind of demo versions of the tracks. But then what I've tended to do is go out and do sessions or go to different studios and collaborate with different musicians and say, okay, you bring in your part to this. And then the tracks morph and turn into like a completely new thing. And that, yeah, they can take like various different forms. And my job, I guess, as a curator of those kind of sounds is to make sure that it's kind of cohesive across the album or the body work, or tells a story that's kind of true to you know, to what I'm trying to achieve. So I think I did that certainly with the last album. And that, what ends up happening then is and the album before that is the process just is like really long, and then it becomes a challenge to kind of remain true to that original kind of in the state of flow part of the kind of the musical expression, right? So I guess, and you know, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing or whatever, it's you know, it's whatever. I'm still happy with the music that I put out, but sometimes I think about it and I look back to some of the releases and think, oh, if I just stopped at this point instead of like going and trying to take it to another dimension or whatever, then maybe the track would be better. It would be more innocent. It would be more truer to the original idea, etc. So you kind of constantly, as an artist, and I think I'm not alone in this, like kind of trying to judge when the end point of a song is, because a song could be, you know, the song composition process could be endless, really. You could endlessly be remixing your own stuff if you wanted to, you know, like who defines like when that track is finished? I mean, it's a really hard thing to do. You know, I'm constantly kind of playing stuff, and then you get that feedback loop from people. I'm thinking, oh, if I just did this or did that, then maybe that would have been better, or a better representation of the original idea or whatever. So I don't know, it's a kind of constant wrestle of like when the thing is finished. And I guess with this, Birds of Paradise, I was like, I'm going to stop myself at the point where I would be like, oh, now I'm going to go and find, you know, a bassist to play this part, or a singer or something like that. And I almost fell into the trap, because I was in Kenya this start of this year, and I was in, you know, we were in the set up a studio, and you know, working with these vocalists, and I was like, oh, I'll just play you Paradise 23. Maybe you want to do a vocal on that. And then they started to do one, and I was going, oh, hang on, right, no, this is now taking this into a new plane, which is where I've kind of been previously. And I was like resolute that I didn't want to do that. So what ended up happening is I had Paradise 23 with this vocal, which it's not on the album, but then I kind of now have used the vocal onto a new track that will maybe come out next year, which is entirely different. But it's the same tempo or whatever, but it's stripped out all the Paradise 23 elements, replaced them with new elements. It's a new track. No one will ever know, apart from if they read this interview, I guess. And then
the secret's out.
Yeah, and then and you know, and then and actually, what I think about is a lot of my music is like that, because it's like a session that was done, and then I'm like, oh, hang on, I haven't used this part of the recording that we did in track that it was intended for. Let me try and use that into something new. So it's a constant kind of like evolution, and kind of everything is kind of related to something that's come before it, which I think is quite nice.
It kind of goes back to that idea of like the flow. So like one song has come from a different one, and it's all just like incorporated. But I find that's quite interesting that you say that, because to me, I felt like every song was so different, like to the other one, but it was also connected like at the same time. I really liked Joy Mantra, because I felt like it was weird. I had it on my phone, and it was playing like just on the ground. And I felt like it was like almost like vibrating. And I was like, what is that noise? I didn't realize the vibrating was like part of the song. So I was like, where is that coming from? And I was like, I just thought that was really interesting. I don't know, that was just like a little note that I had in my head. But
I think the challenges with, well, I love making albums, right? I think that to create, you know, 8 tracks, 10 tracks, 12 there's a limit. You set yourself the boundaries, and you set yourself a kind of rules-based kind of a system that creates a sort of sonic environment that sets the boundaries for these kind of compositions that make up the album. But there's a limitation to that, right? Because it depends where you set those limitations. So for this album, it was like this kalimba preset on this synth that I have, the Casio, and I was like, oh, I love that sound. Great, let's make a track. And that was Paradise 23, the first track. And I was like, oh, that's cool, right? What happens if I did it at a slightly faster tempo and then incorporated another element? But I'm going to keep the same framework. And what happens if I did this? And then you do it quite quickly, like in the State of Flow, where it's like, oh, and it's like an expression of like, of what I guess you have that's in your subconscious brain, or whatever your creative brain is then speaking, and you're creating kind of like different avenues that this environment that all kind of work in a kind of, well, hopefully, I mean, cohesive whole. I mean, they do to me, but then sound different. So they're different versions of what would work in that environment. So that's what I quite like doing is to do that. And actually, it's been quite nice with the feedback they sent out to a bunch of DJs, and like pretty much every single person has their own different favorite track on it, which I think is quite unusual for an album, because usually it's like, oh, that's the hit single, and I like that one, or you know, whatever. But this one is saying, no, I like that, I like that, I like that, and everyone seems to have a different thing, which to me is a really good thing.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that feedback, to be honest, because when I was listening to it, I was like, oh, this one's a good one, but I like this one for that reason. And I just remember listening to Joy Mantra, and I was like, I like that one because it had that vibrating kind of thing. And I don't know why I liked it, but I just did. I was like, it was a good vibe. So when you're making the music, is it more like a vibrant, uplifting energy that you want the listeners to experience? Or like, do you have like a vision of what kind of experience you want the listener to have?
I think that when you're making music, it's for your own enjoyment to begin with, right? Because you've got to love it like before you want to share it with others, I think. So I think that I'm going to sit there because, you know, ultimately with any kind of release, and I'm sure like most artists are like this, they will be the one that will forever listen to this music more than anyone else. You know, like, and because you're constantly kind of having to listen in different environments, different speakers, like adding different elements, taking different elements away. So you're constantly listening to these kind of evolutions of each sort of track to sort of perfect it. So I guess that's the first sort of thing of like, I've got to really love it to be able to then share it with the audience. So that's the first thing. What was the second part of your question? What was the question?
Just like, how do you envision the audience listening to your music? Like, is there a certain like thing or feeling that you want them to feel?
Yeah. Okay. So, firstly, it's a privilege to have people listening to your music in the first place. I think in this crowded space. I mean, there's so much music released. There's, you know, how do you cut through, etc., etc. So to have anyone actually listen to it, that's amazing to me. Even though I've done this for so long, it's still like amazing that some people will listen to this. And then how do I want them to feel? I mean, it's really open to their interpretation. I think like I question this a lot, and I've written, you know, in my blog quite a lot about this kind of thing, which is about what are you trying to achieve by releasing? You know, what is the purpose? Because ultimately it's like it's quite stressful, like in a way, you know. I enjoy, as I've said already, being in the studio, come up with the idea, being in that state of flow. I mean, that's really like the best part of the music production process. So when you then release it, you're basically putting yourself wide open to run this gauntlet of public opinion or non-public opinion, because that's the worst thing could happen, is actually just release it and no one listens to it. You're like, oh my God, what was the point of that? Right. But then, you know, if say they do listen to it and then they like it or dislike it or don't, you know, whatever, you start to get feedback, then it starts to kind of form its own relationship to you in your own, you know, your own mind. You might start to love a track more than what you did originally because the feedback of that one track is particularly good, or so. You know, you're amenable to and very malleable to this kind of feedback loop that kind of comes on. You have to be quite resolute to kind of be like, oh, yeah, you like this, you don't like this. Okay, fine, I'll take that as constructive criticism or whatever. I mean, people generally are very nice. So really, what you know, you I don't know, like, you might be getting paranoid, but you're kind of reading between the lines in terms of what people are saying, in terms of what they're actually feeling, rather than what they're saying just to be nice or whatever. It just depends on your relationship with them. But I think, like, yeah, I don't know what I want them to feel. I think probably what kind of pervades through a lot of my music is this kind of idea of escapism, of sort of sonic travel, like allowing them to kind of, I mean, in this case with Birds of Paradise, it's very much based around this kind of Goa, like where Auntie Flo is originally from, like, and the experience that I had there, which was a kind of paradise of sorts, where you know, I was staying in this fisherman's hut and just very isolated and very peaceful, and it was very it was just yeah, it was an amazing experience to be able to have a few days just of this oasis of kind of calm, this paradise. And yeah, I like allowing people to hopefully experience that to some degree without being able to go there, perhaps, you know, and hopefully gives them some level of kind of transcendence or escapism or joy or whatever, that they can experience just through the sounds, you know, and the music. That's you know, the ultimate, I guess. So yeah, that would be a nice outcome.
For sure. So what inspired the title Birds of Paradise? Does that have like a specific meaning, or is it like more of a metaphor?
I think that well, paradise I mentioned already, in terms of having this idea of finding this place. And for me, I was on this kind of like of this journey because I'd been essentially this kind of like reverse migratory path that my mother had been on, like where her family is all from Goa, then but they moved to Kenya, and she was born in Nairobi or Kisumu, but lived in Nairobi until she was about 20 years old, and then moved to the UK. And at the start of the year, I'd been working with the BBC World Service, and they were doing this kind of documentary on, I guess, on my work called In the Studio, and I basically presented it to them as going, okay, well, I'm going on this trip, which basically took me from Kenya to Goa, these two festivals. It's kind of back to back, and this is kind of like I can use this as an opportunity to kind of explore my roots, my heritage, and my mum's side. And so I'd done a bunch of reading around that, and just kind of came fully loaded into the process and the trip, and went to Kenya, and then ended up in Goa, and it was really like hectic. The whole thing was just like really busy, which was great. It was fantastic. But reaching kind of like this paradise, this loja, the fisherman's hut in Goa, I was like, whoa, this is a chance to breathe. And I've like kind of sort of made it through like quite a busy exploratory kind of experience, and made it through to this paradise of sorts that I can just now feel very comfortable in. And I felt like that was kind of, yeah, like the roots of maybe that side of my family that was there. Like my Auntie Flo was buried in a church like 30 minutes away from that location. When I went to visit the church, you know, everyone on the tombstones was D'Souza or Pinto, and we got Pintos in our family. And yeah, it felt like I just kind of made it back to this place of belonging of some description without over-egging it. So maybe that was the paradise part of it, I guess. And then the birds are part. I mean, like as you heard from Paradise 23, it opens with kind of bird song, and I guess birds and bird migration was a big theme of the previous album, In My Dreams, Bird on Free. So I guess it was a continuation of that kind of idea of like birds being free to kind of travel the globe, without these kind of border constrictions and visas and everything else that we as human beings have kind of constructed. So yeah, that idea of freedom, I suppose. So that was the kind of metaphor, I guess, from the title.
So you mentioned earlier about starting your career in Scotland in your early 20s. How does this sense of freedom differ from perhaps your like earlier startups compared to now?
Sorry, explain that one to me again. So how does the sense of freedom
do you feel like your music has more sense of freedom now, later, that you've like returned to like your like family's like background in comparison to perhaps your early musician career in Scotland?
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I think that music for me has always been about some aspect of feeling free. It's as I mentioned, the early kind of clubbing experiences in Glasgow was about accessing kind of a culture that was alternative, was not mainstream, was not the thing that was sort of presented to you, and the thing that was easily accessible. The easiest thing to access was kind of mainstream culture. That you had to work harder. I think the culture has obviously changed now. I mean, back then there was no internet, for example. So, you had to access these things through doing a bit of work, to do the research, to meet people, to understand, like just whatever you could glean information wise to find out like where were the best places to go, when were these things happening, what to do when you get there. I mean, it was all just like very much about an exploration that you had to, want to do. It was the harder route, I think. So when you got into there, then there was a kind of like, oh, I get it. Like, this is a kind of freedom that exists within the confines of the society that is being presented, the literal, the underground and the overground and stuff. And you've kind of like made it into this part, which is kind of like really fertile and creative and kind of like some great people and then some interesting people. So I think that kind of mentality still exists for me. Although I think the culture has changed like massively. And I think like, you know, clubbing is, you know, total commodity now, and it's like very mainstream now, and there's no real, I mean, there's pockets of underground culture, but it's being really kind of quashed. So again, you have to spend time and effort to find that out, but there's been a sort of blurring of the lines. So I guess the way that I approach things now really is just to kind of stay like true to myself and my kind of vision, and try my best not to be kind of pushed and pulled by what you constantly see on, say, social media or wherever. Like, just try and stay true. It's so hard. Like, you kind of like see something, it's the FOMO thing. You want to like, you want a piece of that because you feel like you've earned it or deserve it. But there's all these other kind of like forces that you know, transpire to make this an opportunity for some other person rather than yourself or whatever. So you just have to kind of like be you know, create your own ecosystem, create your own environment, build up your kind of like connections through individual contact, you know. And that's what I've been enjoying doing, like my Substack page and stuff, is like you can start to have conversations with people direct. You know, when I'm doing events, it's really just like, you know, the people that go really they've done the digging to find me, you know. I'm not support, it's an entirely DIY project now. And I've flirted in the past with management and labels and things like that, and now I'm just like, nah, you know, I'm not doing that at this moment in time. So I'm kind of like just creating my own little world, building my own world, and seeing if anyone wants to kind of enter into that, and being open to anyone. And that's kind of interesting. It makes it quite hard, I think, but it can be quite rewarding. So I think in a way that's very artistically freeing. So back to your point, because you're completely in control of everything, the output, you know, the like everything, which is great. But then it makes it hard to break through, because there's a kind of glass ceiling that exists if you're not part of like you know, say the music industry bubble. Then it's more difficult. But there's recognition from certain people, and you get a few of these gatekeepers kind of into your stuff, and then all of a sudden you get opportunities to share the music with more people. So we'll see where it takes me.
Yeah, for sure. So you seem like someone who has like a zest for life, and you like travel a lot. Is there like a favorite place that you want to like, that you've been to, that you've performed at, or like any place that you would love to go to in the future?
Yeah, I think I mean, like I love traveling and exploring, and it's such a privilege to be able to do that through, if you're booked to play a set or whatever. So I'd like to continue that. I mean, with the stage I'm at in life right now, I'm a father with a young kid. Like, it becomes harder to be able to justify doing a lot of these kind of trips, especially for a longer period of time. And obviously, if you're going like further, that's a big kind of time commitment. So I'm kind of like relatively, compared to what I was before, like limited in my opportunities to travel. So yes, every opportunity is kind of like welcomed. I mean, this was a great trip that I did this year with the Kenya and Goa thing that I've talked about already. One place that I've always wanted to go to, that you know, that I've never managed to make it to, is Iceland.
Oh, okay.
I'd like Scottish thing with the Highlands and stuff, but the kind of the massive, you know, mountainous kind of regions that are like really overwhelming, and the kind of remoteness of it, and the sort of the natural beauty and stuff. So I always kind of say, like colder places are kind of more attractive to me than hotter places.
Oh, really? That's so
Yeah.
surprising, because like
Yeah.
when I looked across your page and everything, it was
Yeah,
given tropical and obviously birds of paradise. That's why I was like, oh, okay, Iceland.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Don't get me wrong, like I still like a hot place, and obviously Goa was a fantastic experience and stuff. So, but I think that I mean, it's the kind of extremes, right? You're interested in people that live in extreme places, and like how they make those kind of places work. And I've been up in the Arctic Circle before for a couple of gigs up at Tromso, and it's just fascinating to me that you've got, like, you know, through the winter 24 hours of darkness, and through the summers 24 hours of light, and like what that does to you is so your psychology and everything.
Yeah.
It can make people a little bit more unhinged, like your life is completely changed in terms of how you approach it by the fact of the kind of the weather, like, and the and this and the kind of yeah, the number of hours of daylight and stuff, so that's kind of interesting to me. And so it seems like a really beautiful place to go and make music in. So I'm on this mission actually I'm building an app at the moment, and it's about sort of deeply listening to the planet. And what I found was, after doing all these trips, I've got a lot of field recordings of different places that I've been in. So I started to make these kind of like soundscape compositions that were using the field recording as the kind of basis, and then building kind of ambient sort of soundscapes, I guess, on as a kind of, yeah, just I don't know, it was almost like if you imagine like a painter, like they're painting an impression of a landscape or something. This is kind of like a sonic kind of impressionist approach. So I've kind of I started to do that, and I've got like 14 or 13 or whatever it is points plotted on this kind of global map. And they're all like various different compositions that are then going to go into this mobile app that I'm going to release next year. And yeah, I would like, if this thing takes off to a certain degree, then the objective will be to go to interesting places that sound interesting. Doesn't have to even sound pleasant, but just unique. I'm kind of fascinated by that. Like, if there's different kind of, think about landmarks, but actually this would be like sound marks, like what sounds kind of represent a sort of certain place. And I was talking to someone about this at the weekend at this V&A thing I was doing, and they were saying, well, there's this place near Arbroath with these amazing caves, and like when the wind blows, the waves come out, there's this whistling effect that kind of comes in and like comes out, and it's like, you wouldn't hear that anywhere else. Unique. And I'm like, yeah, I love the sound of that. That's amazing. So I want to find these places and record them. So yeah, anywhere that's interesting from that perspective, I'm open to it.
Nice. So it's almost like a little experiment, just to see what new sounds you can hear, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I know that a lot of your music is to do with connecting with nature and sound on a deeper level. So would you say your music is more of like an environmental like conversation, or is it spiritual, or maybe like psychological, like you said?
Yeah, I think that's a whole different side to what I do. I think what I've realized is Auntie Flo is this, as we've described already, this kind of global exploration, this club kind of version of this kind of club music. And what I'm doing, I guess now, I've just been releasing things with, like, just as Brian D'Souza. It's, yeah, I think fundamentally it's about the sounds from nature, and that's with a kind of environmental, climate change, sustainability kind of lens on, I guess. So I think that, as a wider kind of point, if we listen to the natural world, and we tune our ears to be able to listen, then we'll be more sympathetic to it, which might mean that we want to protect it a bit more, and be a little bit more conscious about our everyday impacts into that. So that's part of like the kind of the motives behind it. But then I also find it, just from a creative sort of standpoint, maybe a spiritual standpoint as well, very impactful when you kind of can tune in to the sounds of nature, and then this kind of like practice of deep listening, where you can be very connected to nature's voice. And when you start thinking about it, or start reading about it, the natural world, like, interacting in so many different ways that we're only beginning to now understand, and that's what's really fascinating about the time that we're in right now, is it's still like a relatively new field of research that still a lot of scientists, botanists, etc., are kind of like looking into, and that's about how plants communicate, how trees communicate, how fungi communicates. You've heard about the mycelium network and this kind of exchange of ingredients, exchange of information, the World Wide Web is commonly kind of cited as a way of framing that. There's this kind of like fabric that basically kind of exists in every part of the planet, that has existed since before mankind, that's kind of been there, and it's created the fabric of the societies that we know. And obviously plants produce the life force that we need, and stuff. So there's kind of like basic fundamentals that probably to lots of people are very obvious, but to me, I was just kind of blind to and wasn't really paying attention to, which I think probably a lot of people are as well. And then so by being able to kind of explore that domain, and then be able to use music as a medium to highlight these kind of topics, that has become like, very rewarding for me, and is a kind of way of is kind of set this pathway for me to help to hopefully inspire others to feel the same way. And I've had constant kind of good feedback around how that has helped. It's even just this weekend at the V&A, the installation I was doing with my plants can dance kind of concept, and it's like the exploration into biosonification, or using bioelectricity as a means of kind of like representing different plants in with audio. And it makes people think. It's just like paradigm shift for a lot of people. They're like, oh, okay, these plants are like basically alive, and they're doing something, and it's like we should maybe pay more attention to them. So I guess I'm enjoying that sort of foray.
For sure. So your plants can dance. Is that more like a campaign kind of thing, or is it more just like a slogan, like a message you want to get out there?
I'd say it's it's an interesting way of describing it. I mean, I'd say it's an event series / performance / workshop / talk, because it ends up being all those things sometimes at the same time. But in terms of it being a message, I think that the way that I describe it is that it's a provocation to sort of say that this isn't about them dancing, and it's not about dance music, and that's a kind of clear distinction. This is normally it's relatively ambient music. The point is plants are dancing, but we just can't see it because we exist on a different time frame than plants do. So if you time lapse a plant, or period, like it will move and sway and dance, and it's kind of heliotropism where it turns to the light and everything else, and responds to its environment in lots of different ways. But we, in the naked eye, just can't pick that up just by the way that we as human beings perceive time, right? So that's kind of like really fascinating to me, it's like how we perceive time is defined, how we interpret information in this in the planet, and how we group things together as schemas or things are ways in which we as human beings make efficient, our limited capacity and the limited time that we have. Because by grouping everything together, I'd say a forest, like that helps, because like we don't have to think about all the individual elements that make up the forest. But that is just simplifying everything, to make things efficient. So I understand the reasons for doing that. But then if we were actually to allow ourselves the time to break down the forest, then you'd see actually a forest. It's, let's just talk about the sounds. There's a million things. It's not just the forest sounds. There's like a million things or thousands of things that are making up what that forest sounds like. So when you start to really then unpack that, then you're like, wow, okay, and all of those things are kind of like interacting with each other, and it's this kind of canonical effect where something happens and then something happens as a result. And a lot of the questions I get asked about the biosonification stuff is, is this just random? And I think randomness is a kind of interesting thing about as well, because it's like, well, it's not random. It might sound random to you as a human being, but it's not random because it's been produced as a result of the environmental influences that, say, a plant is experiencing at that moment in time. So it's not random. It's just, but it might sound random. That's your perception of it. But it's also like, maybe what is it actually? Is it saying something that's more insightful than just an indication of life? I don't know. So this like area that just it just opens up so many other like parts of the discussion that I find fascinating. So I'm quite enjoying this process with the Plants Can Dance, where originally it was just a performance, and then it became, because I would do the performance and say, "Oh, has anyone got any questions?" And then literally everyone had questions. Then I would be like, "Okay, actually, I'm just going to talk through this," and then people would ask questions as we go. And so I mean, it depends on which thing, but that's it's quite interesting to have these conversations with people.
Yeah, it's a bit of like an oxymoron a little bit, where it's like plants can dance, and which is so simple. So like, yeah, they're just moving, but when you actually look into it, it's way more complicated and a bit more structural than what we think. But
Absolutely.
I guess the only way we'll actually understand it is by saying, well, yeah, they can dance. So yeah,
I
it
mean,
makes
people
sense.
want simple concepts, and also just, yeah. I mean, it's a kind of, it's slightly, I guess, in a sense. So some people don't understand it, and then it has to be explained, and that's fine. You know, like great. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, very interesting. So if you could collaborate with a plant or anything like that, do you have one in mind?
No, well, I mean, I do collaborate with plant. I mean, I think that the collaboration, again, so I would get into the weeds of these kind of conversations, but I used to describe it as a collaboration, and then I described it as more like, I'm like a, what did I say? I was more like a translator.
Mm.
And now I kind of define it more as, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I've got a real definition, but the point being that a collaboration is going to be like a two-way thing. Perhaps I don't necessarily know what the plant wants to do with,
Yeah.
with this kind of thing. So it's more of a translation of the plant's sort of data or output. So maybe that's it. But anyway, for a favorite plant, I mean, typically what I like to do with this, because I make it like completely improvised. So I'll bring like a modular synthesizer with nothing patched in, and then I'll just patch all these cables in to make, you know, a novel soundscape per the event or whatever it is that I'm doing. And then so the plant, it's not like a traveler with a bunch of plants. Like the plant will be something from the locale or provided to me by the venue owners or whatever it is, or just like the plants. If it's outside, like the festivals that I've done this summer, like, you know, you just plug into something and, you know, next to the stage or something. So it's very much a kind of like real time, which I kind of like doing. And so every performance is different. And every plant is different. But if I was to choose a plant, I think that the snake plant is definitely one I would sort of recommend, because it retains a lot of water, and the whole thing is around water and the amount of water passing through the system. So it retains a lot of water. So usually it's kind of produces some interesting results. And actually, what I've found with it, and sometimes actually what I do, I just don't touch anything. I set up a system like a modular system, an ecosystem, let's say, of sound, and the trigger is kind of coming from the plant. And then what the only thing I affect is just to water the plant from time to time, and then you hear the response like going through and being translated into audio, and that's really cool. And people love that when they water the plant, wait 30 seconds, and then all of a sudden the sound starts to adapt, respond to that water kind of going through the plant. That's pretty cool.
That's so cool. I had no idea like you could actually with plants. That's amazing. Like, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah. It's fun.
So looking ahead, what's next for Auntie Flo? Like, I know you've got some tours coming up in Scotland and London, but is there any more projects or experiments that we should look out for?
Yeah, I've got an absolute ton of music to release. I'm trying to figure out like what shape and form that'll takes. Some of it will come out on a State of Flow by a record label. So there'll be a collaboration I've done with this Costa Rican artist that'll probably come in January, called Do Paolo. So I did 2 new extended versions of a couple of tracks from her recent album. And then I've got a bunch. I've done like actually we just did a live show at the Jazz Cafe last year and last week, and for that I made a new version of the Savannah Rhythm Dance track, which I made, in Cuba, but featured Andrew Shong on vocals. And yeah, I think I'll try and release that as part of this sort of Cuban package of music that would probably put out in the label. And then I made so many like dance floor tracks that I think I'm gonna like shop them around to different labels and see if anyone's interested, to see if that gives me a good balance. I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. But then I've also done an album. So this is really long-winded. I've done an album for the label Music to Watch Seeds Grow By. I don't know if you've come across them, but they're a very small outfit run by the Ransom Note, the kind of magazine blog. And yeah, it's literally like artists that to watch seeds go by, and you get like some seeds. So every release they've got, it's usually like tape cassette releases, and they've got like a packet of seeds that kind of comes with it. So they asked me to make an album, and I made an album on the sunflowers. So started growing sunflowers in the garden, and then just sort of was capturing their bioelectricity at different stages of their life cycle, and create this album with that.
That's so good.
You that hopefully will come out, I think January they were talking about. We'll see what that's like. And then this app that I mentioned, yeah, hopefully that will come out, and that'll be a whole body of work with these soundscape compositions. So yeah, there's a lot.
That is a lot. You're jam-packed, honestly. But thank you for joining us. Honestly, like it's been so interesting hearing about everything, and I've learned like so much. Honestly,
No, thanks.
I'm looking at my plants right now, and I'm like, I know what you can do. I know